Cable 8 had a chance to sit down with Brian Clarey. Brian is the editor-in-chief of Triad City Beat, a 6-month-old paper which just published its 26th issue.
I grew up on Long Island, New York, in the 70s and 80s. New York was a really different place back then. It was a lot more dangerous, a lot more heroin. And Brooklyn is a totally different story than what it used to be. When I was 18, I moved to Louisiana to study journalism at Loyola University in New Orleans. And that's where I got my start in the journalism business. I wrote for a paper called The Gambit, which was the alternative news weekly for that city. And I just love the alternative press, boutique journalism, doing the kinds of things that daily newspapers can and won't do, long form stories, the kind of cultural coverage from people who are actually engaged in the culture. Anyway, so I moved to Greensboro in 2000. I worked for the News and Record. They didn't have an alternative press here when I moved here. So I worked for the News and Record, and I worked for Our State magazine and pretty much every other publication in town. And then in 2004, I got a call from somebody who was looking to start an alt weekly, and I helped him start that paper. It was called Yes Weekly, and I was the editor there for 9 years. And I was fired from that job in November. And I started my own thing in February with a couple of my former reporters from Yes Weekly. They came over with me. And so now we've got this new thing going, this weekly paper, Triad City Beat, and a website.
We already have papers such as the News and Record and Yes Weekly, so why would the Triad need another paper?
Well, I actually wanted to buy Yes Weekly. That was the original plan, but that didn't go over very well. So I knew that I would need to start something else. At this point in my life, I'm 44 years old. I've worked for a lot of papers, like more than a dozen papers, worked for a lot of editors, worked with dozens and dozens of journalists. And, you know, I've just seen so many people make so many bad calls, and it was giving me ulcers. And I was like, you know, let's start something from the ground up, something new, something that has no baggage, something that has, you know, no associations with it whatsoever. And that way, people can't tune us out before we even get going, or we won't have to re-educate people as to what we are. You know, I wanted to do something amazing, and I didn't think anybody had done anything like that yet.
Starting a newspaper from the ground up is no easy thing to do. There's so much to it. Writers, business sense, money. Maybe it's not quite as complicated as I'm making it.
What it takes is equal parts confidence and ignorance. Because, you know, I mean, if this is more than, you know, everyone says, why would you start a newspaper? Well, this is, of course, not just a newspaper. We have a website and we have an app and all of those things. You have to have that, because that's how a lot of people are getting their information. About half of our readers are looking at stuff on their iPhones, or half of our digital readers. But, you know, I believe in newspapers. I think that it's really important. And I think that what we do is we can give it on the ground, whereas more and more news coverage is getting homogenized, where the daily newspaper, their reporters are reading the New York Times and everything that's in the New York Times. Well, let's localize that, do the same story, but from a local angle. That's not really keeping people informed. It's the enterprise stuff, the new stuff that you can't read anywhere else. That's the stuff that has value.